Welcome back to the channel, boys. Fat Balloonski's coming at your neck with this Well of Restoration Hunter build. Now for this build, we're going to utilize a new mod that came to us this season, Well of Restoration. Now we're going to be using 4 stacks of this mod. We're going to see just how much ability spam we can do. We also have 100 mobility, 100 discipline. We're also utilizing the new Bombardiers, or not the new Bombardiers, but they kind of got a secondary perk to them in the latest update. So I haven't really used them, and I got a really good roll on some, so I figured I would just throw them in with this build. We got some Wellspring weapons on, and we're just going to try and ability spam as much as possible. So let's go ahead and jump right into this build. Now for this build, we're going to be on Revenant Hunter. We're utilizing Gambler's Dodge, and we're using Dustfield Grenades. As for our aspects, we're using Touch of Winter and we're using Grim Harvest. This is going to allow me to get melee energy for picking up these stasis shards, and this is going to increase the potency of my grenades. I do have 100 discipline as well as a Wellspring weapon, so I'm going to have a lot of ways to generate grenade energy. As for our fragments, we're utilizing Whisper of Torment, another way to generate grenade energy. We're using Whisper of Refraction, Whisper of Fissures, and Whisper of Conduction. The only reason I'm using this one is because I don't want to have to run around and pick up these elemental shards. I just want them to track to me so I can just keep fighting and don't have to worry about picking them up to get melee energy. They're just going to come to me and I just got to keep fighting. So that's why I'm using Whisper of Conduction. It's starting to become one of my favorite fragments just because it's just easy. You just throw it on and now the stasis shards track to you and it just feels really nice. Now as for my loadout, there was actually 2 options, but I decided to go with this one. The first option, which is the one I'm using, is using a weapon with a Wellspring. I have this Threat Detector Wellspring submachine gun. Now my other option was using Monte Carlo, so I can keep getting melee charges in return and generating melee energy. But the main reason I went with this option is because this is masterwork and I can generate orbs, and Monte Carlo cannot, at least not yet until it gets its catalyst. So I feel like that's really holding it back to being in some of these builds, because you're generating orbs is just really powerful. Monte Carlo already is a really good exotic, especially paired with Revenant Hunter. You can just keep that Markov chain ×5 going, but I'm already using Gambler's Dodge and I have a Wellspring weapon on, so I figured I didn't really need it. As for the rest of my loadout, I'm using 2 fusion rifles. I got Null Composure and 1K, so I mean you can use whatever you would like here. Now for this build, there's 3 important stats I want to focus on. Of course, we got 100 mobility, although I am using Whisper of Refraction for the times that I'm not necessarily killing a slowed or frozen enemy. This is going to make up for that, so I have 100 mobility, and plus you move faster and you jump a little higher, which is always nice for the hunter. Now we also have 100 discipline. I want to be able to grenade spam a lot with this build because I can already melee spam with the shards, the stasis shards, and Gambler's Dodge. So I wanted to get my grenade spam up, and this is where the 100 discipline comes in, and Whisper of Torment and Well of Restoration. And then I also have 57 intellect. Now I was trying to get this a little bit higher, but honestly I feel like 57, 50 or 60 intellect is really good because you're going to be getting kills anyway. So I think this is a good even ground where you can get to. I would really like to have this just a little bit higher, but I'll take 57. Now my recovery is a bit low, which does kind of hurt me for this build, but that's okay. I just play a little bit safer and kind of pay more attention to my health bar. Now moving on to my helmet, we have 2 important mods here. We're using Power Preservation. Your super fine abilities create extra orbs of power for your allies. I'm going to be kind of like supporting my team with this build a little bit because I'm going to be generating a lot of orbs of power with my supers, which is going to give them their supers quicker, which is then going to give me my super quicker from the orbs that they generate. Then it can generate even more orbs, plus I have orbs of power for my weapons. So it's like a little bit of a support build, just like small, very small amount of support build. And then we're also using melee well maker, so whenever I do kill combatants with a powered melee attack, I generate 8 elemental well. Now I want to touch on Well of Restoration because for the rest of my armor pieces I'm using Well of Restoration. Picking up a stasis elemental well grants you additional energy for your ability that has the lowest energy. Multiple copies of this mod increase these effects, so you can stack them up. I have 4 stacks of Well of Restoration, so pretty much I pick up 1 stasis elemental well and I get just under half of whatever the lowest ability is. So if it's my grenade, which most of the time it will be, I get just under half of that back, which is just ridiculous. I can pretty much have like grenade spam just from using this. Now it does cost 4 energy slots and you have to have 4 stacks of it in order for it to be that much energy in return. But let's say if you just want to do like maybe 1 or 2 stacks, it's still really powerful. On my chest piece, again, the only important mod here is another stack of Well of Restoration. I was also thinking about maybe using Well of Potency for that extra super energy, but I figured that this was just mainly ability spam. Super spam is kind of like on the side for this build, it's not the main focus, so I wanted to stick with another stack of Well of Restoration. Now, moving on to my exotic piece of choice, the Bombardiers. Now this recently got a little rework, so dodging leaves behind an explosive that detonates after a short delay, damaging targets around it. Now the extra part that just got added in I think when the season dropped was creating a secondary effect based on your subclass energy type. If you're on Arc, it blinds. If you're on Solar, it burns. If you're on Void, it suppresses. And if you're on Stasis, it slows. Now I did notice that a lot of times I would just outright kill the enemy as opposed to slowing them or burning them or blinding them. So maybe in harder content this will be more noticeable, but it still is really nice because if I don't kill the enemy, like if it's a gladiator or maybe like a boss, something like that, it does put that slow effect on them, which is nice. But I saw that most of the time I was just killing them as opposed to slowing them or whatever it was. But still, Bombardier is still really good, and I got a really good roll. It fits perfectly with this build. I mean, I have 102 mobility and 102 discipline exactly, so I figured I would use this exotic. Now as for the mods I'm using for this exotic, I'm using 2 stacks of Orbs of Restoration. Picking up an Orb of Power grants a small amount of energy to your ability with the least energy. Very similar to Well of Restoration, except it's for Orbs of Power. It is not as potent as Well of Restoration. Like having 2 stacks of it, I gotta pick up it's a very small amount, and I gotta pick up a couple of orbs in order for it to really give me my abilities back or almost back. But with Well of Restoration, you just got to pick up like 2 or 3 wells and you're good. Like it doesn't require as much. I mean, this only does cost 1 slot, so it kind of makes sense. And then again, I'm using another stack of Well of Restoration. And onto my Hunter Cloak, I wanted to use Particle Deconstruction, but at the same time, I really wanted to have my 100 mobility stat just because I'm a maniac and I just like seeing the 100 stat. And I also couldn't fit Particle Deconstruction with Well of Restoration. That's another reason. So we're using 2 stacks of utility kickstart. When your class ability energy is fully expended, you gain class ability energy. So you pretty much use your dodge and you start out with like a little bit of dodge energy. You don't have to start from 0. And then of course another stack of Well of Restoration. So we have 4 stacks of Well of Restoration with this build, and then melee well maker is how I'm going to generate these stasis elemental wells. And onto my Hunter fashion, we are using the Festival of the Lost Dino Cloak. It looks pretty cool. This is probably like the best dinosaur armor we got this season at Warlocks. Honestly, it's hideous. I think the Warlocks are so ugly. Titans is pretty nice too. I really like the Titans and the Hunters, but this cloak is just sick. I like that it's not tied to the helmet. It's the cloak that makes it look like a dinosaur, and then the helmet is something completely different. So you can use a different helmet if you want and still keep the dinosaur look. So let's go ahead and drop down to our ornaments and our shaders using all Skelegal, and here are all the ornaments I'm using. So if you want to recreate this fashion, you are more than welcome to do so. So this build accomplished what I wanted it to do, and that was just a lot of ability spam. And I accomplished that by not using something like a 6 Coyote where it just gives you a double dodge or something like that. Like I used the Bombardiers, and I set up the build in such a way that I'm not just getting exotics that give me extra charges on abilities, I'm just having a lot of abilities in general, which is really nice because now that I'm using Bombardiers, I can dodge a lot and I'm leaving a lot of explosives around. They're going to kill enemies, I'm getting grenades, I'm getting melees, and it's just a lot of ability spam, the Well of Restoration, the Orbs of Restoration, and the Stasis Shards. So I'm getting tons and tons of ability energy, and it's really nice, and I'm keeping that lethality, which is also great. Now I don't really have too much to say about this build because it's not very complex. It's just 4 stacks of Well of Restoration, melee well maker, and just picking up these stasis wells and getting a lot of abilities. But there's one thing I do want to say about the Bombardier rework, and it's that I wish that they kind of went about it in a little bit of a different way. Now it's still really good, you're still leaving explosives and they're still killing enemies, but that secondary effect really doesn't affect the enemies unless you're doing something where there's a lot of, you know, chunky enemies, and which then why are you going to be next to all these chunky enemies and dodging around them anyway? And then, or unless you're doing high-end content like Nightfalls GMs or Mash Nightfalls, and again at that point, why are you up inside of a crowd of enemies when you should be kind of hanging a little bit back, playing it a little bit more safe? Now that would be fine and all, but that effect doesn't really happen in the low tier content because the enemies just die from the explosive anyway, which is, I guess that's the end goal, is just kill the enemies and get rid of them. But it would be cool if you could like somehow proc the secondary effect first and then the explosive went off. Like if you dodged, maybe there was like 2 grenades that spawned, and the first one was that secondary effect, like a slowing grenade, and had a bigger radius, like, or a suppressing grenade or blinding, whatever it would be, and then the actual explosive went off second. So it kind of gave you both of the effects as opposed to them just happening at the same time, because on low tier content the enemies are just gonna die, which again, that is the goal anyway, and in high end content it's not really a good idea to hang around a crowd of enemies anyway. So there needs to be some kind of way that you can activate the secondary effect without having to just kill the enemies right off, or just getting killed after you dodge in the first place. But that's all I have to say, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the build. It's definitely a fun one if you don't like too many complex builds. This is a great one because it's just 4 stacks of 1 mod, and then you have 1 mod to generate the stasis elemental wells. So, and it's just simple, a lot of abilities, which a lot of abilities is really good, especially on something like Revenant Hunter, where you have the dust field grenades with Touch of Winter, which makes them really potent, and the melee for Revenant Hunter is just insane for ad clear. So definitely try this out if you're a Hunter main, and let me know what you guys think. But if you guys like this content, please like, subscribe, and share. It truly helps me out a lot. You can also check out my other videos, links are in the description below. I have a lot of crazy builds, so go ahead and check that out. And you might as well follow my social media. I have a Twitter and an Instagram, both at @fat_balloonskis. But with all that being said, deuces.